Well, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us here at the intersection of faith and culture. This is the Meeting House on Faith Radio, and it is great to welcome back to the program the president of an organization called Communio. His name is J.P. DeGance. We also have John Van Epp, founder of the relationship education provider Love Thinks. He is a trained pastor, and the two of them have written a book together. It's called Endgame: The Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. And that sounds like a very large and challenging enterprise, but something that is absolutely necessary. And we're going to be actually talking about the state of marriage, how the churches can actually be involved in promoting and strengthening marriage, and some other aspects about the work that the two of you do. So JP DeGance, John Van Epp, let me welcome you to the Meeting House here on Faith Radio. Great to have the two of you along today.
Great Excited to be here, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
All right, well, let's start out by just giving a thumbnail of the two of your organizations. JP, you and I had the opportunity to talk several years ago around the founding or the launch of Communio. It was actually part of another organization. It was an initiative, and then it was, as we might say, spun off. So tell me just a bit about that and what you're intending to do.
Yeah, well, thanks, Bob. It's awesome to be here. And Communio, what we are is a nonprofit that consults with churches, and our purpose is to provide cutting-edge tools and ministry strategies to solve the family crisis, which will renew faith in America. And our work started at, as you noted, as a pilot initiative under another name, the Culture of Freedom Initiative, and we worked with a large group of churches and pioneered a concept we call a data-informed approach to relationship ministry, and helped move almost 60,000 people through relationship education in one county over 3 years, and saturated that county in Florida with digital impressions, and saw the divorce rate drop 24%, and saw churches who collaborated in this and baselining their attendance grow by 23% in that time. And we realized there was something there, and we wanted to take the learnings from that and replicate it, and that became Communio.
John, Love Thinks, been in existence for about 25 years, as I understand it.
That's right. So back in Northern Ohio, I opened up a private practice, a counseling practice, after founding a church. So we did that, and then transitioned when I did my doctoral work. And in the mid-90s, which is after about 10, 12 years into my private practice, I really wanted to do some prevention, because you're working predominantly in therapy with remediation, helping people fix things that got broken. Anybody that did that knew that if you looked upstream, you could have identified some things. If just this individual or couple had done something differently, they might have really had a different trajectory of their relationship. So I began to develop courses and programs based around a model that I had of what relationships really are. It was called a Relationship Attachment Model, or RAM. And they just really took off. By the year 2000, I had both military, which is obviously government funded, but a lot of chaplains in the military had started a program, especially in the Army, to really push out relationship education. And I had a course for singles, a course for couples, a course for families, all based around this model. We began to have nonprofits through the 2000s into 2010 to 20. So the next 20 years just had a tremendous number of really government funded, state, federal government funded nonprofits, military, chaplaincy, say, let's take relationship education and go to the people. And that became something that really spoke to my heart. They were like, chaplains were stepping out of the chapel, for example, and going into the community of the military and saying, let's go to where they are and speak to them about their most intimate, struggling relationships and dating and marriage and family. And that warmed people up then to have spiritual discussions and conversations. And I saw that somewhat of a model. And I said, how come churches are not stepping out of their campuses into their communities and trying to build a relationship with their community through offering relationship content because they had tremendous opportunity to do that. And I felt also a great responsibility. So I was carrying around this desire. In fact, I took all of my materials and in the mid 2015-16, put it into a church-wide kind of 6-week church-wide series that churches could then use this same content with sermons and elementary, middle school, high school, and in small group studies. All this at simultaneously, everybody learning the same kind of language. So all of that was going on in my career, in my life, with a deep desire to speak to the church in America, the church in America, about you need to embrace this mission. And it was really at that moment in 2019 when JP and our lives crossed, and we had really identical missions, even though we had different focuses. I was, kind of working with churches to have them actually put on something that would launch a relationship focus and get some evidence-based material, skills-based material right into their church experience. And JP was working to organize and mobilize churches to actually do that. Our lives crossed, and we said, listen, let's get this put into a book form and really challenge the church in America to have a paradigm shift of their priorities.
Well, you are listening to Meeting House here on Faith Radio. The co-authors of the book Endgame, the church's strategic move to save faith and family in America, JP DeGance, John Van Epp, joining me today. So, JP, I want you to take an overview, if you would, of marriage in America today, the family structure as you see it. First of all, give us a diagnosis as you see it, as far as the state of marriage and family today, just in our culture in general.
Sure. And I'm going to give a quick prologue to that by noting that the state of faith in our country, and we get into this in the book, the vibrancy of faith is being entirely driven by this factor. So if you're listening to this and you think maybe marriage isn't as big of a deal to you, and there's other things on evangelization or youth outreach or just other work that you want to do, I need to tell you that you're focusing in the wrong area. That the reality is the faith as belief in Jesus Christ is, and then we unpack this in the data, is entirely dependent in our society on the health and vitality of our marriages and our families. And sadly, the state of marriage and family is not good right now. Okay, so today there's 31% fewer people getting married every year than in the year 2000, and that excludes the most recent pandemic year, which was itself a historic low. Okay, so it's much worse than that. We're 61% fewer people getting married every year than in the year 1970. Women and children are principally the victims of this. Just 46% of kids reach their 17th birthday with a married mom and dad. What we know is that has cascading effects on education, crime, poverty. But pastors need to understand, and every churchman and every Christian needs to understand, it is driving the flight from the pews and from the church. In the book, we unpack that a Christian, a millennial with constantly married parents is just as likely to go to church, nearly just as likely to go to church as a baby boomer, if I know one thing about both people. If a 27-year-old came from an intact married home and the 60-year-old came from an intact married home, there's really fundamentally no difference in how frequently they go to church every week, which means the fall of the family, the reduction of the number of kids raised in married homes is almost entirely responsible for the collapse of church participation and the rise of the religious nuns.
And interesting, John, when you think about the decline in the percentage of people in the population that are getting married, I hope I stated that right, but you're seeing a decline in the number of people or percentage of people getting married. So what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Bob. So let me give kind of a macro view. So let's just step back and look at what's been happening since about 1960 to the present moment. So marriage historically was considered a package deal, and there were several relationship experiences that were coupled with marriage. So sex even though sometimes you might have somebody have sex outside of marriage, right? But it was considered as a social norm to be coupled with marriage. And the same was true with life partnership and parenting. If you were going to have children, it was going to be coupled within the kind of structure of marriage. And if you were going to have a life partnership, it was considered. In the 1960s, the decoupling effect of those three areas becoming decoupled from marriage began to grow. And they moved away from marriage and were started to be perceived socially as independent, something you could do, and actually a personal right. I have the personal right to go out and have sex with somebody, and it has nothing to do with commitment and definitely nothing to do with marriage. The same decoupling effect happened to then life partnerships. So cohabitation began increasing, and it increasingly, as you went from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, research clearly shows that cohabitation increased as becoming more and more a kind of experience of partnership independent of not only marriage, but of commitment. We don't know what our commitment is. We haven't even defined or talked about our commitment, but we're having sex and we're spending every weekend together, so we moved in together, that type of experience. And then how many babies are born to unmarried moms began increasing dramatically, so that the average now is 40% of all babies are born to unmarried moms. But if you look at specific races, specific segments of our society, it can go up to 75% of all babies are born to unmarried moms. As that has happened, marriage became more and more minimized, even critiqued or criticized, right? It even, it's just a piece of paper. And in fact, just the opposite we know to be true, that marriage is actually what holds people together in that kind of a union and that kind of a commitment. So what happened in mainstream culture, and unfortunately we show in the book, the trends in the church from Protestant evangelicalism, mainline Catholicism, the trends in the church are just chasing after mainstream cultural trends in sexual practices, in cohabitation, and even in unwed parenting. So unfortunately, that decoupling effect has greatly affected the church. When you think about all of that, all right, just think of what JP was saying. Where is faith shared, transmitted to the next generation? It is largely done through the structure of the family. You take a family and you break it, they attend church every week, and halfway through the kids' upbringing, that family breaks apart. It doesn't take a lot of reasoning and logic and thought to just see automatically half of the kids begin to drop out of faith. They have wounds from the hurt of the family. They have logistical issues because now half of their time is with mom and half their time is with dad, and that's two different places of worship. All these different things begin to break down the transmission. So it's the intact family, as JP said. When you just look at an intact family of the millennial generation, millennials that grew up with mom and dad that never divorced, the number of them that are now as adults involved in their faith and actively engaging in their faith, it would be the same percentage as 3 generations earlier, because that intact family is the singular predictor of the transmission belt of faith. And so what we're basically saying in the end game is this, in a one sentence: if the church does not step into the space of saying we must change the trends in our culture, in our community, that are breaking down family and especially marriage, which is the core of it. If we don't step into that to change those trends, then the breakdown of marriage and family in our culture will erode the transmission of faith, and Christianity and the sharing of the gospel will continue to become less and less effective.
Well, you're listening to Meeting House here on Faith Radio. JP DeGance, John Van App joining me today. They are the co-authors of this new book called Endgame, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. And JP, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here. First of all, do you get, I guess it could go to both of you, but do you get charged with being a bit counterintuitive in your approach? Because someone could say, well, stronger churches make stronger families. And what you're saying in a sense is that stronger families contribute to the strength of churches. So it's a bit of a reversal that's out there.
That's right. And look, in the big, taking a quick step back, there's definitely what you would call bilateral causality. Both fuel each other. And there's a great book called How the West Really Lost God, written by Mary Eberstadt. And she talks about it being a double helix. And we reference that in the book, that faith and family reinforce each other. There's no doubt about that. But causally, looking at history in the West and in the US, the sociological and psychological evidence that we unpack in the book demonstrate that what's driving the bus is the collapse of family is preceding and driving the collapse of faith. Okay, so this is, for many of the church, this is an eye opener. Actually, we chronicle that the church is usually trying to solve the crisis of faith by focusing on who is leaving the faith, which is our youth. And we add up with a very conservative estimate, at least $2 billion in annual spending on youth discipleship and youth evangelization each and every year. That number, I note in the book, is easily, could be 2 to 3 times that, at the $4 to $6 billion range. And what do we, as stewards of the good King, what's the return on those talents that we're investing? Wow. The return is really negative, right? The average age of those with no faith keeps getting younger. In the most recent 7-year statistic of the measure, the religious nuns reduced nationwide an average age from 38 to 36 years old. They're getting younger and younger. What we're not seeing is that our youth falling away is the smoke. It's the effect of the collapse of the family. And so what youth ministry is, and I invest in youth ministry, my wife and I do, we've been involved in it ourselves, but the reality is we have to recognize what it is. It's a search and rescue mission. You're running in and trying to save those who can be saved, but you're not going to stop the crisis from happening until you find the source of the smoke, which is the fire, and the fire is in the home. It's the family.
Well, you're listening to Meeting House here on Faith Radio. JP DeGance, John Van Epp joining us today, co-authors of the book Endgame. And I want to direct the next question. I'm going to start with you, JP, because this actually is compatible with the overall how Communio, your organization, got started. And also, John, it relates to what you were saying earlier as far as chaplains in the military who were actually looking outside of just those with faith, for instance, on military bases, and looking to see how the entire community could be impacted, not just those within the community of faith. JP, your work with Communio, basically I believe it was a county in Florida, the churches got involved, but they were trying to impact not only family structures in the church, but they were also trying to impact family structures in the community at large. Why do you see that approach as important?
It's critical to both work. We call it an inside-out approach. So it's critical to both help those in the pews. We've now completed north of 25,000 surveys of those in the pews. We find that 1 in 4 say they're struggling right now in their marriage. So those who come to church on Sundays need help. However, those in the community need it more. And we use an analogy in the book of an old-fashioned cross-shaped church architecturally, right? The vertical access point in the church there, I called it in the analogy the Jesus door. That's the best door to enter. That's how the church is designed. And we want people to encounter our Lord Jesus right off the bat. But unfortunately, because of the breakdown of the family, okay, it's increasingly hard for folks to understand that there's a Father in heaven who loves us, because they have never really experienced the love and attachment of an earthly father. And so they're not ready for the Jesus door. And so we talk about that side door into the church. That's the relationship door. We encourage the church. There's a lot of nihilism right now. There's a crisis of loneliness, suicidal ideation, a lot of woundedness, and the church can actually evangelize and spread the gospel most effectively by speaking into this need right now. And we note that in the book that the substance of evangelization is and always will be the gospel, but really the platform to advance the gospel is through relationship health.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that too,
Sure.
because Bob, listen, let's think the history of missions, right? The history of missions always said, listen, when you go into the frontier of wherever you're trying to bring the gospel of Christ, you have to find out what are the most dire needs of the people. And if it's hunger, then before you can really help them to understand the gospel of Jesus, then you got to feed them. If it's clothing, if it's shelter, if it's school systems, if it's education. So the dire needs have always kind of been the platform for where we step in with compassion and empathy and showing the love of Christ, as then people get warmed up to the message about Jesus Christ. So that has always historically been it. Our contention is the dire need in Western civilization, and particularly in the American society, the dire need is relationship health. And people are really struggling. And there is so many, messages of disinformation, really the messages about marriage, the messages about dating, the messages about, what really brings fulfillment are so contrary in many ways to just the Christian values of love, marriage, permanency, fidelity, children being raised by parents that are an intact family, on and on. So we say step into the community if the church steps in, and there's a tremendous number of resources. That's been my world, is providing resources, and I have many colleagues that are doing the same. Church has tremendous number of resources that they can step in and build a relationship with their community, even off campus, to the extent where the community begins to see the relevancy of this religious institution way beyond just a spiritual source. That they're speaking to my most needed area of life, my relationships, my experience of love, my own personal fulfillment, and the hearts melt and open up to the gospel. And that's why the platform, we believe, is relationship needs, and particularly speaking to marriage. So it really has been effective by a lot of organizations outside of the church. And we just think the church is the only institution that can truly have the potential of changing the landscape of the American family and marriage in America.
The co-authors of the book Endgame, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America, Communio President J.P. DeGance and John Van Epp, the founder of Love Thinks, joining us today. All right, so we have actually touched on what I see, and I think it's coming clearer to our listeners, I hope, about the nature of this endgame. As we conclude, give us some direction, if both of you would do that, as far as how churches can actually become involved and take that step to move the culture, the community around them toward that end game.
JP, can I start and you finish?
Yeah,
Because I think you have a good wrap up.
Sounds good.
So I've been helping churches to kick off a series. And so I want to do just a quick disclaimer, because I do think there are a lot of churches, particularly in the evangelical world, that are what I call series junkies. So they do a series, and then before the series is even done, the question is, hey, what's the next series? Let's jump to the next one. And so with that warning, I think a really critical thing is for churches to have a paradigm shift. But I have a series that is a unique series because every week, every message, everybody involved in the series, it speaks to both singles and couples at the same time. And most series about relationships have been like a marriage series, so then the singles feel very left out. And but this series is unique in that it involves everybody. It's all inclusive, from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds, and it has small group studies and it has messages. And so my involvement is, hey, help the churches to really see the power in among their own people of focusing in on relationships, not to do a series and then say, hey, what's next? in terms of some new series, but to say, how do we now take this excitement about relationship health and improving our relationships, put it in two areas on a regular basis in our calendar throughout the next 10 years of our ministry, so that our ministry is regularly doing this, to translate it into outreach into our community. And maybe if we had a third, to make sure we institute it into our financial budget, so that we are giving money in our budget to not only marriage ministry, but also outreach for singles, dating, marriages, families. But we are really investing in this. And so that's my hope of what my series is doing. It's not only having an immediate impact, but it's having a paradigm shift of priorities for the church.
JP, what do you say?
Yeah, you know, I want to echo that and just add to it. Ultimately, we believe the next great awakening in this country will only occur if the church focuses strategically on renewing relationship health and marital health. That's the key. So in order to do that, we need to use the very best tools, technologies, strategies in ministry to do that. The gospel is too important to give not a full effort here. And so toward that end, Communio is set up as a nonprofit ministry that consults with churches to help equip a church with a strategic framework to reach out to the community and all the tools and to be able to do that, to draw folks in from the community to boost their relationship health. We call it a data-informed full circle relationship ministry. Any of your listeners can learn more about it by going to communio.org. Certainly John and I would encourage all of your listeners to get Endgame, the book. Go to endgamebook.org, buy the book. It's got the whole strategy laid out for your church so that you can take it immediately and go and do and make disciples of those around you.
Very good. So it's endgamebook.org.
Endgame, that's right.
All right. And if the two of you would each give me your website address for your respective organizations. John?
Sure. So we actually have 3 websites, but for those in the church, I would tell you to go to RAM, R-A-M series, S-E-R-I-E-S, so ramseries.com. And that is talks about that series that I was describing, and it has small group studies, sermons, and things for elementary. But that's a good starting place.
All right, JP.
Yep, and I would encourage listeners to go to communio.org, COMMUNIO.org. You can go to our About page. It's prominently linked there at the top, and you can get a good dive into how we work and how we support churches.
Very good. That was JP DeGance, also John Van Epp, joining me today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio. The name of the book is Endgame, the Church's Strategic Move to Save Faith and Family in America. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of the program. Appreciate the conversation.
Thanks so much, Bob. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. We really appreciate you.